So, yes, this video is coming out a little bit later than I'd like it to, just by a little bit. But here we are, part 3 of the Access Blockbusters Beginner's Guide to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, aka the second half of Phase 4. Like I said up front, I know this video is coming out a little bit late. My initial goal was to put these videos out in January so that I could recap the previous year and talk about all the projects that had come out before and prepare you guys for the projects coming ahead. Obviously that didn't happen, so here we are. Better late than never though, right? So before we get any further into the MCU Beginner's Guide Part 3, I wanted to thank you guys so much for the support on Part 1 and Part 2. These videos have just been amazing because I've gotten the chance to interact with so many of you guys in the comments down below telling me that you are just so happy to have started the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You guys are so enjoying the journey that these films have been taking you on. And you guys also have been letting me know about all the other people in your lives that you have been showing this video to, who have really benefited from just getting sort of a beginner's foundation to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because I know it can be really confusing. So again, thank you so much for the support on Part 1 and Part 2, and I'm hoping that Part 3 will do much the same as Part 1 and Part 2 did, really just helping you guys to figure your way through this vast multiverse of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, please make sure to do so. Join the Access Blockbusters crew. We have great content like this coming at you. Subscribe for a Part 4, subscribe for rankings, tier lists, movie reviews, rewatchings, all that good stuff, and that only comes if you subscribe and hit the notification bell. And without further ado, let's get into Part 3 of the Beginner's Guide to the MCU. So just to pick up right where we left off from Part 2, Part 3 is a continuation of what is known as Phase 4 of the MCU. Now, if you're not familiar with what a phase is in terms of the MCU, I'd recommend watching Part 1 of the Beginner's Guide to the MCU, linked in the description down below, to get a better idea of what I mean when I say Phase 4. But if you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you watched Part 1 and Part 2, and if you haven't, please make sure to go and watch those parts so that you're caught up. And in Part 2, I explained what Phase 4 of the MCU is, and so we are firmly in Phase 4 of the MCU. This video is going to cover 2022 of the MCU, which closes out Phase 4. So 2022 featured 3 feature-length films and 3 shows, as well as 2 specials, and we'll talk about what those specials are in just a little bit. But we will be going through all of them, starting with early in 2022 with Moon Knight and ending in late 2022 with Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and technically after that, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. And just like with last part, I'm going to be basically going through each project individually and talking about what I think you need to know before going into each one of them, the context behind them, maybe some of the films and series that you need a refresher on before you go into them, some background information as well, and perhaps how they will tie into the rest of the MCU going forward. Again, these videos, these Part 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s, and so on, these won't be as elaborate as Part 1 of the Beginner's Guide to the MCU, because the Beginner's Guide is really laying the foundation for everything going forward, so that you can now enjoy Parts 2 and 3 and really just dig into Phase 4 of the MCU. Now, if you haven't noticed, because I'm going to assume if you're watching this video, you're at least familiar or have watched everything in Phase 4 of the MCU that was released in 2021, and that is WandaVision through Spider-Man No Way Home. And if you did watch those videos, then you're going to have noticed that Phase 4 of the MCU is starting off a little bit differently than Phases 1, 2, or 3 of the MCU thus far. And that's because in 2022, we learned that the MCU's Phase 4, 5, and 6 are going to be a part of what's known as the Multiverse Saga. So a lot of what happens in Phase 4 is going to be directly tied to parallel universes, alternate realities, and a guy named Kang that we'll talk about maybe at the end of this video. But all that to say is that, yeah, I mean, the beginning of Phase 4 might feel a little bit confusing and disparate, and I think even the second half of Phase 4 will also feel a little bit confusing and disparate as well, and we'll talk about why that might be towards the end of the video. But just so you know, right off the bat, this phase is really setting up a lot of new heroes that are going to be facing off against a big bad, just like the Avengers did in Phases 1 through 3 with Thanos and the Infinity Saga, and this is really going to be setting up the multiverse and its ramifications going forward in the MCU. Which is why, last we left off the MCU in Spider-Man No Way Home, the multiverse was about to break apart and all these Spider-Man villains were going to come into the Earth 616 universe, Earth 616 just being the main MCU timeline. But that was prevented for now. And now we head into 2022 with the rest of Phase 4 of the MCU. And that's basically all you need to know heading into these projects for 2022 in the MCU. Just keep on going through Phase 4, and know that if you're thinking in your head, well, these projects aren't quite as connected as they were in Phases 1 through 3, like Iron Man showing up in the Avengers and Hulk showing up in Thor Ragnarok, yeah, that's kind of by design. Whether or not this is a positive or a negative thing for the MCU, I'm not going to get into in this video. This is purely an informational video and not an editorial, so we'll just leave it at that. Alright, so let's start off with these 8 projects. Again, just going one by one, talking about what you need to know heading into each of these 8 projects to finish out Phase 4 of the MCU in 2022. Because 2023, which we'll talk about at the very end of this video, kicks off Phase 5 of the Multiverse Saga and the MCU. We'll get to that later. So 2022 opened with Moon Knight, and Moon Knight is a streaming series on Disney+. Now, heading into Moon Knight, you might ask yourself, I've never heard of this character before. Who is Moon Knight? I heard of Hawkeye. I didn't really hear of Eternals, but it was a big movie, so I thought I'd watch it. But a Disney Plus show about a Moon Knight? What is that all about? And I think, honestly, this is where Moon Knight benefits itself, because Moon Knight is really not connected to the MCU as a whole, yet. Now, that doesn't mean Moon Knight the character won't appear in future MCU projects, and I'm going to leave it very vague because obviously if you're watching this video, you probably haven't seen Moon Knight yet, but the thing about some of these projects in the MCU Phase 4 is that they don't really connect to the larger MCU picture as of right now. They might later, obviously, but they don't right now, and Moon Knight is clearly one of these projects, so you really don't need to know anything about Moon Knight heading into the show. The show is very standalone, it really doesn't feel the need to connect to the wider MCU as a whole, so you're not really going to have any problems there. Next up, the second project in 2022 from MCU Phase 4 was Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and that was released right after Moon Knight was done airing in May of 2022. Now, the last time we saw Dr. Stephen Strange was in Spider-Man No Way Home, which came out at the end of 2021, and Stephen Strange, well, he was getting himself into all sorts of multiversal trouble. He obviously lent a hand, though unwillingly, in breaking open the multiverse just a little bit, and well, a lot of chaos ensued. Now, the thing about Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is that it actually doesn't really tie into Spider-Man No Way Home in that sense. Like, if you remember all the way back to MCU Phase 2, Iron Man 3 was really a film that dealt with the trauma of the Avengers, and it was really almost a direct follow-up to the Avengers. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is not the same in that way. It's not like Stephen Strange spends the entire movie dealing with the ramifications of Spider-Man No Way Home and just grieving over the trauma of what he did or anything like that. It's really not like that. But what happens in Spider-Man No Way Home, I do believe is important to at least continuing the journey of Doctor Strange and the multiverse saga, which is, again, like I mentioned, what phases 4, 5, and 6 are going to be about, the multiverse. So at the very least, I would just keep what happens in Spider-Man No Way Home in the back of your mind, for now, at least. However, the property that actually really does impact Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is WandaVision. And I have to say, if you haven't seen WandaVision before going into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, you have to. I mean, obviously you don't have to, but you kind of have to. This is one of the projects in the MCU, one of the few projects in the MCU that I believe doesn't make a lot of sense to people who have been sort of casually following the journeys of these characters, but hasn't been following every single little thing. Because if you haven't seen WandaVision and you watch Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness, a lot of the decisions and a lot of the things that the characters are doing don't make a lot of sense. And not to spoil anything major, because this is in the trailer and I'm probably using trailer footage, and you've probably seen the character on the screen right now. So again, this isn't a spoiler, I'm going to say, because it's in the trailer, but Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, is in this movie, and she has a pretty pivotal role to play. But what she does in the film is not going to make a lot of sense if you haven't seen WandaVision. So again, I just implore you to watch WandaVision first before watching Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, otherwise you are going to be very, very confused. The other show that kind of does impact Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is Loki. If you've watched Loki, then you'll know that at the end of Loki, Sylvie, a variant of Loki, it gets very confusing, kills a variant of Kang, it again gets very confusing, who is called He Who Remains, and that basically breaks apart the multiverse. Now, what Kevin Feige, the boss of Marvel, has said is that this event of Sylvie killing He Who Remains is what breaks open the multiverse again, and is what allows things like Spider-Man No Way Home and things like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and the events that ensue in that film to happen in the first place. So while the film may not directly reference the events of Loki, just know that the things that are happening in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness are probably as a result of what happens with Sylvie in the TVA. Again, when you're dealing with things like the multiverse, things do get confusing. As for how this film will affect the rest of the MCU, well, it's called Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and this is called the Multiverse Saga, so expect this film to have a pretty significant impact going forward. Doctor Strange is obviously a very pivotal character to the Avengers franchise, and I do believe that what happens in this film will have long-lasting consequences moving forward. So right now we have one show, Moon Knight, that really doesn't affect the larger plot of the MCU going forward, and we have a film, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, that seems very important. So again, a good mix of the both. Let's turn our attention to a show that strikes a little bit of a balance of the two. It doesn't have the same multiversal impact on the MCU, but it does lead into upcoming films in the MCU, and that is Ms. Marvel. Ms. Marvel, just like Moon Knight, is another Disney Plus show that released in early summer of 2022. And if you're asking yourself, wait, who's Ms. Marvel? Have I heard of her before? Is she in the MCU? The answer is no. She hasn't appeared in the MCU before, but if you're asking yourself also, wait, that sounds familiar. Don't I know this person? That's Captain Marvel. And if you're asking yourself then, does Captain Marvel have any relation to Ms. Marvel? Not directly, no. But the very basic premise of the show is that there is this young Pakistani girl living in New Jersey who idolizes Captain Marvel, and I'll let the show take itself from there. So really, there's not a lot you need to know going into the show, but just remember that she really idolizes Captain Marvel. And I guess if you want to sort of brush up on your Captain Marvel history, go rewatch the film or go look up plot summaries or whatever you need to do. But just remember that Captain Marvel is a pretty big influence in this young girl's life. This young girl being Kamala Khan, the protagonist of Miss Marvel. Not a lot that you really need to know going into the show, but you might want to know that after the show is done, Miss Marvel will return in a film. One of the instances where a TV show character from Disney Plus will return in their own film, just like how Wanda Maximoff was in WandaVision, and now she's in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. But this time we have a TV show character being introduced in a TV show, and then we'll make her feature debut in an upcoming film. And that film is The Marvels, which is Captain Marvel 2, and that will come out in 2023. So just know that this show will be important for the Marvels, which we'll talk about maybe in another video, maybe in part 4 of the Beginner's Guide to the MCU. Alright, up next is a feature-length film, Thor Love and Thunder, which came out in July of 2022. Now, Thor Love and Thunder is another more isolated project in the MCU, which is kind of interesting because Thor Ragnarok was one of the more pivotal films to Phase 3 of the MCU in the Infinity Saga, but Thor Love and Thunder is kind of its own thing. It's written and directed by Taika Waititi, who directed Thor Ragnarok and I believe co-wrote it as well, and he also plays Korg, one of the best characters in the MCU in my opinion, and is really just another Thor adventure. Except this time, again, not a spoiler because this is in the trailers, and I'm sorry if you wanted to not know anything going into these projects, in which case probably not the best idea to watch the video, but I digress. But anyways, Jane Foster returns in this film. How? Why? Well, if you see the trailer footage, you might be a little bit confused, and I think just watch the movie. The movie will do a better job explaining it than I can. So again, just remembering the character of Jane Foster from Thor 1 in 2011 and Thor the Dark World in 2013, yeah, probably a little bit important, but the film will fill you in on everything that you need to know. This is another Thor adventure. It picks up pretty much right after Endgame, and yeah, that's all you need to know. As for its impact on the MCU going forward, who's to say? It's not entirely clear, but I'm sure that Thor will make an impact in some way, shape, or form. Alright, the fifth project is another Disney Plus show, and this one is She-Hulk Attorney at Law. And if you're noticing a pattern, by the way, yes, all 3 Disney Plus shows in 2022 introduced new characters into the MCU, which is really interesting. So She-Hulk is Bruce Banner's cousin, Jennifer Walters. And if you're asking yourself, just based on that, is Bruce Banner going to be in the show? Well, look at the trailers and look at the footage that's on the screen. The answer is yes. As for why or how did she become a Hulk? Well, the show will explain all of that, so you don't really need to know a lot going into it, but just remember that Bruce Banner was the smart Hulk at the end of Avengers Endgame. He was sort of a combination of Banner and the Hulk, and that will sort of lead right into the events of She-Hulk Attorney at Law. The other thing that you really need to know about She-Hulk Attorney at Law, though, is that this show is really self-referential. If you haven't heard the term fourth wall breaking, it's basically the concept where the 3 walls, metaphorically speaking, are the walls in which the characters are existing, I guess, in their fictional universe. And the 4th wall separates us as the audience from them. It's like we're watching through the screen, which is sort of the 4th wall that they can't really see through because they can't recognize that they're fictional characters. However, some properties, some movies, some shows like to utilize the 4th wall to have the characters talk directly to us, and She-Hulk Attorney at Law is one of those shows. So again, just if you're a little bit surprised that she starts talking to the camera randomly, that's why. This is just a very, very self-referential show. As for why she's able to do that, it's really unclear, but just know that she's able to do that, and there will be a lot of meta jokes, there will be a lot of references, there will be a lot of self-referential humor as well. And if you've been following the MCU thus far, there might be some surprises, so yeah, stay tuned for that. How does She-Hulk affect the rest of the MCU? Again, not quite as clear, but it's introducing a new character, and she should be appearing in a lot of things, so we'll see. All right, the next thing up is a new format. So we've had the movies that have been released in theaters, and we have the TV shows that have been released on Disney Plus, but we have another Disney Plus format called the Special Presentation. Now, the Special Presentation is a format, but that basically just takes one episode length, so like 45 minutes to an hour of a story, and just condenses it into 1 hour-long length story, and that's about all it is. It's basically doing its best to introduce new characters or reintroduce you to old characters, and just tell a quick story. So the first one that was released was a short film, or a special presentation as MCU is calling it, called Werewolf by Night. And Werewolf by Night is a Halloween special, so it is going to pay homage to a lot of the old horror films, and it is stylistically very, very different. For this special presentation, there is absolutely nothing you need to know going into it, just enjoy it for what it is. It's not particularly scary, it's actually quite entertaining. So if you're not a big fan of horror, don't worry about that too much. I don't think that you'll be scared all that much. Then in November of 2022 was Black Panther Wakanda Forever, a film that was released in theaters and came at the heels of the passing of Chadwick Boseman. So if you've been following the MCU, you'll know that the character of T'Challa has been one of the mainstays of the Avengers. But if you've also been following the news, you'll know that the lead actor who played T'Challa, Chadwick Boseman, passed away tragically in 2020. And so in terms of the MCU, the question became, how is that going to impact Black Panther Wakanda Forever? There were talks that they weren't even going to release the film, they were going to recast him, but ultimately the director Ryan Coogler, who directed the first Black Panther, decided to keep going with the film and didn't recast the role. So the character of T'Challa is not in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. They will explain why. And the film will center around all the supporting characters that were in the first Black Panther, so Shuri, Nakia, Queen Ramonda, Okoye, as they deal with the absence of King T'Challa and the Black Panther. The film will draw on some threads that were previously there in the MCU, but honestly, if you just know that the background context is Chadwick Boseman had passed away right before the film was set to be in production, and they sort of had to move on and change things, and then now they ended up with this movie where the characters are really trying to grapple with the absence of King T'Challa, I think it'll make a lot more sense to you. But also, it's just a very solid film on its own, and it stands pretty well as an MCU entry. And this film, more than a lot of the other ones, might have a really large impact on the future of the MCU going forward. There is a lot that is introduced in the film. There are a host of characters, some familiar, some new, that will probably make their mark in the MCU going forward. So this film, again, is pretty important. And finally, wrapping up Phase 4 of the MCU, we have the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. And this, if you're familiar with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and if you're familiar with what happened in Avengers Endgame where Gamora died but then she came back, and then you're familiar with Peter Quill and Mantis and Nebula and Drax and Rocket and Groot and all the members of the Guardians of the Galaxy, this one's for you, because this is just a fantastically wonderful, silly Christmas holiday special that James Gunn decided to make right before filming Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And that is the MCU Phase 4. Again, it's a very long phase. There are a lot of properties in there. You have your TV shows, you have your films, and now you have your special presentations. And all told, there have been some criticisms on in the MCU Phase 4 for sure. There have been criticisms that it's too long, that there have been too many projects focused on quantity over quality. But again, it is what it is. This video is more informational, and it's just trying to get you all the information you need to enjoy Phase 4 as much as you can. Now, in terms of the plan going forward, well, the MCU continues to move on, and it will now enter Phase 5. And probably when this video comes out, MCU Phase 5 will probably be in full swing. The first film up is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which is a crazy title, and that will kick off really a lot of the storytelling that goes into the multiverse saga. So you're really going to get a sense of who the big villain is, like I mentioned before, Kang the Conqueror, a variant of whom you saw in Loki as He Who Remains, and you're going to get a sense of really what the story is going forward for the whole MCU as one overarching narrative. But again, Phase 4, like I mentioned before, it seems a little disparate, it seems a little scattered because it's introducing a lot of characters, and I'm sure that these characters will come back into play later, but for now, Phase 5, here we come. So thank you guys so much for watching Part 3 of the Beginner's Guide to the MCU. Let me know in the comments down below if you'd like a Part 4 where I talk about 2023, where I talk about Phase 5, where I talk about the Multiverse Saga. And comment down below with what other videos you'd like me to be making as well. Make sure to subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, give this video a like, and I will see you guys in the next one.